Greetings, I'm Richie Zellin, and in this lesson I'd like to share with you my chord melody arrangement of a great standard written way back in 1936 by none other than Charlie Chaplin for his film Modern Times. And along with this arrangement, I'd like to teach you Kenny Burrell's solo over his rendition of this same piece, and it was recorded on his album From Sun Up to Sundown. And if you haven't heard this version yet, I'm sure after you do so, you will agree that his solo is a masterclass in the art of storytelling when improvising. So next, let me play both my arrangement followed by my transcription of Kenny's solo, and then I'll break it down measure by measure so you can better understand its construction and what's going on. Before I proceed to analyze the solo, I want to let you know that I have prepared a special study package you can download and follow along with. It features a PDF with notation and tab for both the chord melody and solo, an MP3 of me playing both, a band in a box file, and a MIDI file you can open up in the free app MuseScore. All of this is available for a nominal contribution from jazzguitar.richiezellin.com/premium, and you will find it in the chord melody section. Next, I want to analyze Kenny's solo because there is lots to learn here. And as far as the chord melody arrangement goes, let me just say that it is based on the sixth diminished concept associated with the late Barry Harris. And if you download the notation and tab, it will be very straightforward to learn. It uses almost exclusively drop two voicings. So let's begin by listening again just to the first four measures of the solo. The very first measure is the greeting, and it is short and to the point, and it swings from the very start. It's almost like something Miles would play. And notice the use of space. Also speaking of Miles, the final 2/8 notes on this first measure are a typical motif he would repeatedly use to end a phrase. As a matter of fact, I did an entire video lesson titled The Miles Secret Sauce Revealed, where I analyze a bunch of Miles solos that employ this same motif. And I will place a link to it in the info section down below. Before proceeding, let me point out that in this first measure, Kenny is emphasizing the D note, which is the fifth of the G chord. Notice that he is initially building his solo by targeting this note. In measure 2, he plays a fragment of a scale, which jumps up to the 9th in the 3rd measure, and he then ends the phrase by again emphasizing that initial 5th. This is storytelling at its best through improvisation. Now, notice that in measure 4, he implies the changes at the point of transition from the A minor to the D7 by playing the 2 most important guide tones. That is, before leaving the A minor, he plays the flatted 7 and resolves to the F sharp, which is the 3rd of the D7, the major 3rd. And this, by the way, is a concept employed by every great improviser. And we call it smooth voice leading. Now, notice that at the end of this 4th measure, how he continues the story he began with a pickup to measure 5. Again, he uses that D note, which becomes the 5th now over the G chord, and he emphasizes it rhythmically a total of 4 times in 2 octaves. This leads to the 6th measure, where now he emphasizes a C sharp over the B flat diminished. In measure 7, he begins with the 9th of the A minor 7 and descends down the arpeggio playing the flatted 7 and the 5th before doing a pickup to the 8th measure, which concludes the phrase. Here we have a minor 2/5, and again he uses the guide tone concept to imply the changes that he used over the previous 2/5 in measure 4. This time, however, he emphasizes the F or flat 5 over the B half diminished. Note that this is the characteristic note employed to identify this chord family. Immediately after this, he transitions to the E7 flat 9, leaping down to a G sharp, which is the major 3rd. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. That leap at the point of chord change is not considered smooth voice leading. Well, you're wrong. In this case, it is. If you bring that G sharp up an octave, you'll have an interval of a 3rd between it and the previous F, and that in turn would constitute smooth voice leading. So what Kenny is doing here is what is known as octave displacement, which is the reason it sounds so good despite that leap. If you want to know more about this technique, I also did an entire video lesson on it, and it's titled Charlie Parker's Use of Octave Displacement, and I will also place a link to it in the info section down below. And before we proceed to the next set of measures, now that we have all this new information I have shared with you, let's listen again with better informed ears to the first measures of this solo, and I want you to pay attention to the details that I've pointed out. Measures 9 and 10 introduce more of a bebop sound this time. Note that up to this point, Kenny has used mostly diatonic notes, but now he begins to get busier and introduces more chromatic approaches, especially during these two measures. In measures 11 and 12, he syncopates two descending scalar fragments of a C Dorian, which, again, are fully diatonic. And we'll see that he remains, for the most part, diatonic throughout the remainder of the solo. As a result, we can better appreciate how Kenny's use of diverse, syncopated rhythms drive his melodies. In measure 14, he again emphasizes a note, this time using the F, which is the flatted 9 of the E7. And I must add that of every jazz guitarist that I've listened to, I believe Kenny is the master when it comes to swinging a single note and yet making a meaningful statement. So here is proof that it's not how many notes you play, but instead how you use them. And again, the focus here is on rhythm. Measure 15 starts with a ninth of the A minor and uses a chromatic approach to begin an ascending scale through measure 16, which leads into the B section of the solo. Before I analyze this upcoming section, I want you to listen to these last 8 measures and try to listen for these details that I just pointed out. For the remainder of the solo, I'm just going to point out some important aspects that I believe you should take note of. In measure 20, we have a 2-5 where he plays a straight ascending minor 7th arpeggio. Note that he ends on the G or flatted 7 and then transitions to the F sharp or the major 3rd to begin the D7. When transitioning to measure 21, which is the 1 chord, he transitions with the B, which is the 3rd of the G6. So again, in these two measures, we have a classic portrayal of the changes being implied through the use of guide tones. In measures 21 and 22, he again applies that trademark milk a note concept he likes to use. And this ends on measure 23 with the 2 repeated 8th notes, which again is the syncopated motif I talked about in the very first measure. In relation to this concept, another one that I did that I just remembered is one called The Secret Bebop Rhythm Cell Revealed. And I will make sure to also place a link to it in the info section down below. Measure 24 is simply a variation of the guide tone line that he previously applied in measure 8 over the same changes where he used octave displacement. Remember? And before we examine the final portion, let's just listen to these previous 8 measures and listen for the details that I just pointed out. Measures 24 and 25 begin with an A minor pentatonic sequence, which lead up to the C minor 7 in measure 27. And the remainder of the solo is very blues-oriented, which again is another element present in every Kenny Burrell solo, the blues. And note especially in the final 4 measures how a G minor pentatonic is superimposed for most of the changes. Let's hear it. I hope this analysis has been useful and that you'll be able to incorporate the various concepts we've explored into your solos. As usual, I appreciate your comments and welcome your questions. And if this is your first time on this channel and you enjoyed this lesson, please be sure to subscribe and don't forget to click on that bell icon so you'll be notified of my upcoming lessons. Until we meet again, you know the drill. Practice, 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 then rinse and repeat. May peace be with you. Shalom.